Welcome back to Couch to Coders. We are in part 2 of understanding data tables. In our last episode, we looked at the basic components of a table. We reviewed the difference between a column and a row and the difference between a data point versus a data record. In this lesson, we're going to build on that and we're going to start talking about what types of data can live inside those columns and rows. Reviewing our outline, we've already completed data tables, and then in this lesson, we're going to move on to data types. Let's get started. What is a data type? Data comes in 3 different types for now. There's a lot of other types out there, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on. We have text, which can be alphanumeric. That feels like a big word, but if we break it up into its individual components, it's not that complicated. So when we say alpha, we mean letters, like alphabet, ABC. Numeric sounds like numbers. That's what we mean, numbers, 1, 2, 3. So text can be alphanumeric. That means you can have letters or numbers, and it can all be considered text data. The next type of data we have is a numbers type. And the difference between the numeric versus number is that it can be, as I call, mathed. So for example, you can add numbers, you can multiply numbers. The last type of data that we'll talk about is the date. A date format means that it has some kind of time component to it. So if you imagine it has a month, a day, a year, and that can be formatted different ways. So here in the US, we always do month, day, year. Over in Europe, they do day, month, year. So you can have all types of formats. So we could do 5/28, 2023. We could also do 2023, 0523. There's a lot of different ways that you can slice that. So why do we have data types? Data types tells BigQuery how to handle the data. So for example, suppose I had text data and I said, I want you to add these 2 text columns together. And one of them had ABC and 239. So if you're thinking about it and you're like, someone told me you need to add letters and numbers together, what would you come up with? For BigQuery, what it would give you is it would literally just paste them together. ABC 239. Okay, so we can combine 2 text columns by literally just kind of gluing them together. Suppose I wanted to do that with 2 types of numbers. So I had 1 and 1, and I wanted to combine them. BigQuery would not give me 11 if it's a number. It's going to give me 2. How does BigQuery know the difference between a 1 that is a number that can be mathed versus a 1 that is a text that's treated differently? The easiest way to remember it is that anything with text is between quotation marks. This can be a double or a single. So let's look at an example. If I have just a regular number 1, that means this is a number. I can do math to it. If I do column A plus column B and they're both numbers, it's going to be 1 plus 1 equals 2. If I have column A, column B, and they're both text data, and there's still a 1, and I do A plus B, it's just going to combine them and paste them together, which would end up giving me 11. So numbers are only numbers, and text can be numbers or letters. And then dates have a special format, which we talked about briefly on the previous slide. And we'll go into more detail a little bit later. So let's do a little more elaboration on these data types because they are kind of tricky when you first get started. First off, my explanation of number equals number is the worst. It was really hard for me to explain it in simple terms, but I think it really leverages why we have different subsets of what we classify as a number. So what do I mean by that? BigQuery has 3 types of, quote, numbers. So within your number field where you can do math, we have something called a float, which is a decimal, an int 64, which is a whole number, You might wonder, what is the 64? That has to do with storage space. And then BigQuery has something called numeric. And in this one, I said numeric's like a float. So now you're like, well, why do you have numeric and why do you have float? You should only have one. That doesn't make sense. Numeric has to deal with how many decimals it will hold and how much storage it has. So for your purposes at this stage in the game, float is the same as numeric. There's slight differences, but you don't need to know about that now. In contrast with text, we just call that a string. So a number can be broken up into 3 different groups: float, int, numeric. Text only has one category, and it's called a string. Here are some other types of data that you might come across within BigQuery. You have null, which is a missing value. So imagine that you have an emailing list and someone didn't put anything in for their email. That would be considered a null value. Something that's a little tricky early on, we'll get practice with it, so don't worry about it, but just be aware, is that null is not the same as 0. So suppose I didn't put my age when I was entering in for a mailing list. And so that mailing list would have my name, it would have nothing for my age, and then it would have my email. If we were saying that missing was the same as 0, then it would say my age is 0 years old, and you would think I was a baby. But that's not true. I'm not a baby. I'm an adult, but you just don't know what my age is. There's also things called timestamps, arrays, and structures. And Booleans, which are true and false. Those last 4, these are just for your information. As we come across them throughout the course, we'll start elaborating on them. But for now, just know that they exist. So let's do another knowledge check. Same format as before. What does alphanumeric mean? Go ahead, pause your video, jot down what you think it is. So alphanumeric, as we remember, means that it can be letters or numbers. Alphabet, numbers. What do we call text data? Text data we call a string. I don't know exactly why it's called a string, but that's just how it is in the coding world, and so that's what it will be. What is the difference between a 1 in quotation marks and a 1 without quotation marks in BigQuery's world? A 1 with quotation marks is treated as a string or text data. So you cannot do math to it. I cannot multiply that number. I cannot add a 2 to it and get 3. It is considered text. In contrast, a 1 without quotation marks is a number that can have math applied. I can square it, I can double it, I can add to it, I can subtract to it. What do we call a whole number? A whole number we call an int64. Int stands for integer. If you remember back to your high school algebra, that's what you would call a whole number, an integer. And the 64 has to deal with storage sizes. Okay, what do we call a decimal number? We call a decimal number a float. The reason why we call it a float is because that decimal kind of floats around. That's how you can kind of remember it. So let's review the different vocabulary words that we went over in this lesson. First, we talked about data type, which describes how the computer processes a data point. By specifying the type of data that we have, BigQuery knows how to handle it. Is this a string? Is this a number? Is this a date? What do I do with it? A string is alphanumeric text data. int64 is a whole number. A float is a decimal. Numeric for now is just another name for float. A date means that it has some calendar date meaning to it. There's a time component involved. And null is missing data. So with that, we're going to wrap up today's lesson, and I will see you for the final part in this data module. See you then. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would be so appreciative if you could like the video and subscribe to help me create more content for you. Thank you.